Before we get into it, big thanks and shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business.
Hey guys, it's Crystal and it is camera comparison time, and I'm very excited about this one because we have the iPhone XS Max against the Google Pixel 3 XL. Could also be called iPhone XS versus Pixel 3 because they got the same cameras all throughout. These are just the bigger versions of the phones, but the smaller ones have the same cameras as the bigger ones, if you didn't know that. So on the iPhone XS Max, we have that same dual camera setup that we saw on the iPhone X, two 12 megapixel cameras with an aperture of 1.8 and 2.4 on the telephoto lens, optical image stabilization all throughout. We have a 7 megapixel selfie camera with an aperture of 2.2, and on the Pixel 3 XL, not looking too different as last year on the outside because we have that same 12.2 megapixel camera on the back with an aperture of 1.8. No telephoto lens, but we do have something called super res zoom now that we'll talk more about in a little bit, but it gets a little more fun in the front because we have two 8 megapixel selfie cameras, aperture of 1.8 and 2.2, and that second selfie camera is a wide angled one. So we get wide angled selfies now. So of course I'm gonna start with some selfies because I feel like I gotta, and I usually do anyway. So let's take an iPhone XS Max selfie and a portrait one, regular Pixel 3 selfie, and now a wide angled one. Whoa.
And now it is time to take a look at all the photos side by side so we can really see those differences, starting with the selfies. So immediately I'm seeing a sharper selfie on the Pixel 3 XL, and everything's much softer on the iPhone XS Max. Also warmer colors on the iPhone versus cooler colors on the Pixel 3 XL. And we're probably gonna see a similar theme throughout all the photos just because these phones are kind of known for those characteristics. That being said, it does seem like the iPhone is giving us even softer looking selfies this year, but I mean, it looks good. And on the Pixel 3 XL, there actually is a beauty mode that you can use, but this is without any beauty mode. And yeah, you do tend to see a little more detail because of that extra sharpness everywhere. I am gonna throw in that wide angle selfie on the Pixel 3 XL now, just because it's such a nice feature to have. Like, it's nice to get more in the shot, and especially useful and convenient when you have more people in there. I feel like I'm a broken record when it comes to wide angle selfies. Like, I always say how much I love it, and I really do. Like, I wish every phone had that feature. And now let's look at these same selfies in portrait mode. Let's zoom into those edges. Okay, what are we seeing here? So iPhone giving us that softer edge, and the Pixel a much like cleaner cut edge, but I think it depends on like if you have long hair or shorter hair on which one you're gonna prefer, because in this situation, like on the Pixel, even though it's definitely doing a good job at finding those edges, you can see it kind of like turns a little weird with the strands of my hair on the side. Yeah, definitely not perfect on either. The Pixel also seems to keep all of me in focus really well. Like, my shirt is nice and sharp as well as my face, where on the iPhone, it mainly focuses on my face. It's still like soft all throughout, but you can see the shirt is not as clear. And the wide angled camera on the Pixel is also capable of portrait mode, which makes for a really cool looking shot. Again, it was a cloudy day, so you can't see too much detail in the sky, but it looks good. And I mean, it's not too different from the regular portrait mode picture. Everything kind of looks, in terms of color temperature and the way that portrait mode defines its edges, is pretty much the same, and still doing a pretty good job. Got another selfie here with little Gabby. But the very first thing that I'm realizing with these two photos is just the color difference between the two. Our skin looks extra yellow greenish on the Pixel's photo versus the iPhone's more true and accurate representation of us. Apart from that, that extra sharpness that we're getting from the Pixel makes it lose some information in the shadows, but it does help it in other areas of the photo because you can see those tree branches more clear, and also the power lines. On the iPhone, those power lines just kind of disappear. And so even though I do like the colors on the iPhone more in this picture, that extra sharpness is really helping the Pixel here. And here's the portrait mode selfie with Gabby. Both of us are in focus on the Pixel's photo, and on the iPhone, Gabby is gradually blurred out, which technically is more realistic, but when it comes to a selfie with another person, you're kind of gonna want both of them in focus, so the Pixel usually does a great job at that. And of course, the wide-angled portrait selfie on the Pixel. In this one, we do see a lot of mistakes, not only with my hair, but also the background. So yeah, definitely not perfect, but is overall a cool feature to have. And now let's move on to the rear camera and see some daylight photos with the phones. In this one, you see more of the sky, so it's still that cloudy day, but overall the Pixel is still the sharper picture. And it looks really good here because the iPhone's photo just looks super faded looking. It's still really impressive in terms of dynamic range, but I feel like the Pixel's dynamic range mixed with its crisp quality to its photos looks really good in this one. If we scroll throughout the rest of the photo, we can still see that the iPhone is maintaining a good amount of detail, especially in the shadows. Here's another good picture to see which phone keeps the most detail since there's a lot going on, and I'm gonna zoom into this pumpkin. Again, both are pretty sharp here, but it's still slightly sharper on the Pixel's picture. And the Pixel is consistently cooler in color temperature, which I can definitely tell with my sneakers here since they are more yellow than blue in real life. And in this picture, we're getting more of a scenic shot, getting more of that sky in the background. The Pixel 3 is definitely the darker picture here, which again causes it to lose some information in the shadows. And because the iPhone's picture is brighter, the orange of the pumpkins just seems to pop out a little more. And I am gonna give both phones an A+ here in terms of dynamic range because they both do an amazing job at outlining the clouds and all the detail in the sky very nicely. Slightly more on the Pixel, but both look really good. This next picture of me holding these very interesting looking pumpkins kind of reminds me of the last one because it's a very apparent difference of dark versus brighter. Because it's darker, it causes us to lose detail all throughout in every single dark part of this image. But I mean, the overall picture, you know, looks good. And again, just like in all the other photos, we are seeing a more warmer picture on the iPhone side and also more vibrant colors here too. In this picture, I'm really appreciating the detail that we're getting on the Pixel's picture, that especially zooming into these flowers on the bottom here in the bottom center, they kind of just look flat on the iPhone. And just like in the last picture, the iPhone's colors are still very vibrant. We can definitely see that in the red of the bow on the little pumpkin over here. And this next picture, nice and close up to this pumpkin, just further supports what we just saw in the last picture because zooming in, definitely seeing more detail on the Pixel. But zooming out, it is more dull when it comes to its colors and it's less vibrant. Now in this photo, it almost seems like the phones switched roles here with their white balance and color temperature because the door definitely looks warmer on the Pixel 3. But I'm gonna take the opportunity here to use the telephoto lens on the iPhone and super res zoom on the Pixel 3 because it does not have a telephoto lens, but it does have something called super res zoom that lets you zoom in digitally before you take the photo so that you can preserve and maintain detail. I will say the iPhone is still doing a slightly better job at keeping the most amount of detail. You can see that in certain parts, but I'm still really impressed with the Pixel because it's doing all of this with just one camera on the back. Like, it doesn't need a whole nother lens to keep this amount of detail. It's doing all of this with just that one camera and its software. Now let's jump into some portrait mode pictures with the rear camera on the back. And the first thing I gotta say is that they are gonna appear slightly different because the angle of the lens is different. The iPhone is using its telephoto lens while the Pixel is still using its main camera for all of this. At a quick glance, both seem to be doing pretty good with their edges, but zooming in, it does seem a little harsher on the Pixel 3 XL. Overall, the iPhone XS Max seems more balanced in terms of exposure here, but I do prefer the colors on the Pixel in this portrait mode picture. But just like in the selfie camera, the Pixel is doing a great job at just keeping me all sharp and in focus all throughout and not just my face. And here's a portrait mode picture with an object, not a person, but kind of the same characteristics that we saw in the last one, even though now that we're not dealing with hair, edges on the Pixel seem a lot better. Also with the iPhone's picture, everything does seem a little more blurred and bokeh out compared to the Pixel's photo, but we gotta remember we do have control over the aperture now, so if you do want the aperture like super crazy or more subtle, you can control that with the slider when you edit the photo. Now this is a slightly lower light portrait mode picture, still daytime, but we were standing in the shadows, and I love this picture of Gabby so much, but there's definitely some differences between the two. The highlights are definitely more overexposed on the iPhone. There are overexposing in the background on the Pixel a little bit, but a lot more blown out on the iPhone's picture. In terms of the edges though, they both do a pretty decent job, and it's still maintaining that pixel sharpness all throughout its photos. When it comes to colors too, I do prefer the portrait mode colors on the Pixel again versus the iPhone here. Now before we get into low light pictures, I want to tell you guys a little more about Squarespace. I'm kind of in the process of making my own website, and if you guys are too, or if you're even thinking about making a website, you gotta check out Squarespace because it makes the whole thing a whole lot easier. And you can do it all with Squarespace, from setting up the domain, you can even transfer a domain, designing the website, online stores, there's marketing tools, there's even 24/7 customer service to guide you along the way if you need the extra help. Like, they literally think of everything so that anyone can start making a website today. Now, my absolute favorite thing about it is all the different templates that you get with Squarespace to design your website. Like, it's so effortless to make a good looking website with these. You can even customize them to your liking too. I would even say it's hard to make an ugly website because they're all so beautiful looking. So if you are considering finally getting that website going, or you need a fresh and fun new look for yours, make sure you check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/CrystalLaura for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Time for some low light pictures. I'm really excited to see the differences here and see which phone performs better in low light. Starting with this picture of these beautiful fall mums, and the difference is tremendous here in terms of exposure and brightness and sharpness. Overall, the iPhone's picture is just very dull looking next to the Pixel. And even though the Pixel's picture is not really accurately representing what was going on there in low light, the fact that it can capture this in such a dark area is amazing. And this is a much wider shot, so there's a lot more to look for here. But overall, the Pixel, with a mix of its sharpness, colors, and brightness, it looks so good. And zooming in, we're definitely seeing a lot of grain and loss of detail in both pictures, but the Pixel is still keeping more information in its shadows. Now, because the Pixel is a brighter image, when it comes to all the light sources, like the little light bulbs and the lamps throughout, they are more overexposed. And then we have this cute little scarecrow guy that's looking so nice and vibrant on the Pixel once again. Not only is it more vibrant, but zooming in, there's definitely a lot more detail and sharpness going on, while the iPhone's picture is looking a little too blurry and dull. And this next photo is pretty much the same thing that we've been seeing, but the iPhone does seem to have a little more detail now. That being said though, it's still lacking a lot of the light and vibrancy that the Pixel has. And of course, I also have some low light selfies. Pixel 3 is still doing a great job at keeping sharpness and detail, but I do like the colors more on the iPhone. Everything is looking a little too yellow and green on the Pixel 3. Here's a wide-angled version of that on the Pixel 3, and even though it's a wide-angled camera, it's still doing a great job at keeping that sharpness and detail, but those colors are still not the best. I also have a low light portrait mode picture here where the iPhone is still looking super soft next to the Pixel's picture, but I still like the colors more. And of course, we gotta take a look at the wide angled portrait mode. It's still kind of the same as the regular portrait mode, but just a lot more in the shot. Last portrait low light selfie here. I'm gonna put the Pixel's wide angled camera versus the regular on the iPhone, just because there's more people in the shot, so we gotta appreciate that it gets to have more information in there. But the best thing about the Pixel's picture here is that it keeps everybody in focus. It knows to look for faces versus the iPhone just does that gradual blur to the back, which is again the more realistic approach. But when it comes to a photo like this, it's nice to have everybody in focus. Here's some 4K video from both phones, and I immediately love the overall look of the iPhones in terms of color and contrast, sharpness. They both seem to focus on things pretty quickly, but the Pixel 3 does seem to expose brighter areas faster. And just by walking at a steady pace, video seems to be slightly more stabilized and smoother on the Pixel 3 as well. That being said, just like I said before, I do prefer the warmer colors in video on the iPhone XS Max versus those cooler, more faded colors on the Pixel 3. So overall, when it comes to iPhone versus Pixel, two huge flagship phones, it is usually going to come down to preference and which camera is best for you, because they both take great pictures, but they are gonna be very different. With a Pixel, you're always gonna get more sharpness, more contrast, overall darker and more cooler tones in color temperature. But with the iPhone, usually warmer, more faded, softer looking pictures, especially this year, more softer, and also more vibrant in its colors. The only thing is, if you do take a lot of low light photos with your phone, the Pixel 3 really came ahead in my opinion because it was just consistently brighter, sharper, more contrast, more detail, and overall a lot more vibrancy in all of its low light photos. And it really pulled ahead in low light with that one of the biggest, newest camera features is coming to the phone next month in a software update called Night Sight that will basically allow for brighter images in darker low light situations. So I'm excited to see how that does when it comes out. And I do want to quickly point out that throughout this whole camera test, both phones had their HDR on auto, HDR plus auto on the Pixel 3, and HDR auto on the iPhone XS Max. But overall, like, they both did a great job. Like, the Pixel's known for amazing dynamic range, but both phones did a really good job when it came to that. But besides that, of course, let me know in the comments which phone's camera you guys preferred. Would you pick up a Pixel 3 XL or iPhone XS Max? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And again, thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you later.